With a podcast. R&B coming in with the podcast. Yeah, you know it's Russ and Baker with the podcast. Everybody gonna be first, not last. With a podcast.
Ugh,
Yeah, you know it's Russ and Blake with the podcast.
ugh.
Everybody going up on this podcast.
Hey.
Yeah, we gonna be first and we not last.
Mm.
All right, welcome back to R&B podcast with Russ and Blake. You know what it is. Happy Tuesday, everybody. One of my favorite days. Second to Monday. So many blessings in the air. So many blessings. Last week we talked about motivation. I feel like that will segue perfectly into today. There was a video that I watched that I wish I had watched before the last conversation, but you know how it be. Sometimes the blessings don't come in the order that you expect.
But they come nonetheless. We
both, actually, never mind. I was about to say we both did traveling. You didn't end up traveling. You're going to be traveling soon. But I did some traveling. Went to Mississippi this past weekend, and traveling is such a blessing. I feel like a lot of people love to travel and don't necessarily understand how significant it is for them to be able to see other areas of life and how people live in other cities and the dynamic, because it's so different from state to state. It's kind of crazy sometimes to me. So from Phoenix, Arizona to Jackson, Mississippi, it's like two completely different places. But I was so grateful to be able to go to Jackson, not only to meet some family on my wife's side, but also see my grandma, let my baby meet my grandma, my grandmas. My baby met 3 of her grandmas. My baby has 6 grandmas, I think.
Wow.
Big blessings. So yeah, we have 5 generations in the house, and that was amazing experience. But there's so much history in Mississippi, and I can't help but be grateful after having that experience, being able to come back to this, because it opens up my perspective, and I'm just so grateful for what we do, and grateful for the opportunity to continue to do so.
Yeah.
So we gonna get it rolling.
Yeah. And when you were out in Jackson, Mississippi, like you're saying, it's a huge difference. Very cool to be able to bring your baby from Phoenix, Arizona to Jackson, Mississippi, where she just entered the world in 2022 and gets to see such a historic place.
Yeah. Yep.
Especially for people in her race. And obviously she doesn't know what's going on, but you guys see that.
And I feel like there's energy in the air there of sorts. And it really inspired me to want us to talk today about having a growth mindset, because there's been so much change in our country over the past couple hundred years, but especially in that concentrated area, Jackson, Mississippi. So we went to a civil rights museum and were able to see kind of the timeline from slavery, like the beginning of slavery, to basically where we are now. And a lot changed in a short period of time. And there was some awful things going on not too long ago. So, you know, it's been difficult for a lot of people to have a growth mindset simply because of some of the restrictions that were placed upon them and some of the conditioning that took place over a long period of time, right? So a lot of the people that were able to grow and be successful had to get away from that environment. And you have to admit that some of the people in that environment have struggled to get out of a certain kind of mindset.
Yeah.
And it's up all the way into the government, you know. There's slowly being changes as far as the leadership in the area and business dynamics and things like that, but it's certainly not been on pace with some surrounding states.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of my family ended up moving to, you know, surrounding states, and especially Chicago. And there, now we have kind of generations beginning to be business owners, entrepreneurs, things of that such. But, you know, we've talked about the Tulsa massacres and how that happened. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. So that was an area that had a lot of very affluent, successful Black business people, and their opportunity was stripped from them, and their families were destroyed. So, you know, as we try to build our business, and I try to build my other business on my own, repping, elevate, you know, motivate.
Yes.
I just have so much more purpose behind it other than wanting to build a business or wanting to make money or wanting to help people. Even just the fact that I have this privilege to start an LLC and be a leader in my community and be a voice for people. You know, you think back to like Martin Luther King, where did he start? And it doesn't even have to be for a civil rights movement, but whatever it is you're doing, having an opportunity to speak up and be heard and do that on a daily basis and not have some restrictions that people did that time ago is something that can't be overlooked. And it's certainly motivating for me. And it's helped me have a growth mindset, just being reminded that this is a privilege, you know?
Yeah, and all the people that you mentioned as far as leaders in civil rights history, they were facing repeating feelings of fear. You were telling me about how you went to a civil rights museum in Jackson, Mississippi,
Right.
and you met the man who was a freedom rider who had been arrested, you said 109 times?
Yeah.
So imagine what that means. Sometimes going back to a position where you know that you could lose your freedom all because you want your expression of what you feel like should be just and fair to happen in your environment. And that's beautiful, and that's why the spirit is always going to live within people. I like that you mentioned it can be hard for people from that environment to have a growth mindset. And then mention how you went to a museum, because I feel like as a metaphor, which we like to do a lot on this podcast, that happens in people's lives. When they move away from the energy that can possibly stagnate them or remind them of what was so hard and go out and thrive, then one day they can go back to like a metaphorical just museum and kind of observe without being so caught up in the actual emotion of what the trauma felt like.
Yeah.
So with
reflection, right?
With reflection, exactly. But it's hard for a story or a moment in our life to go from what we felt like we were caught up in to feeling like a museum that we can just reflect on.
Yeah. And I guess kind of when I reflect, it does feel like a museum. You look at pictures of yourself and things that you've written, things that you've obtained, and hear a song that registers a memory, and being able to look back on how you were and who you are now is very important.
Yeah. And if you can do it with a feeling of fondness rather than a triggering anger.
Because some people are either disappointed in who they were, or they're disappointed in who they are, and they want to be what they were, or they're, just dissatisfied. But, you have to be proud of what you were, where you came from, and be proud of where you are now, and just know that if you're not satisfied with this now, then the next moment is an opportunity for you to make change.
For sure. And that's the beauty of African American history, is because you could learn about the more traumatic events, the more brutal events, and feel like, wow, that how come that happened to my ancestors, or feel some type of victim mentality. But that's only if you focus your scope on the brutality, because if you look at the people who were inventing things or leading peaceful, conversations and groups and doing nothing but positive things in the world, then you're not going to feel like, oh, everything was just brutality. Some things were mad creativity, ingenuity, fearlessness, all these virtues that are beautiful and that we can still work from the spirit of today.
Yeah, I mean, back to the beauty and privilege of being able to travel when you see different areas. I had an experience in Jackson, Mississippi. Last year, I had an experience in Miami, Florida. I've had experience in Portland and New Jersey, and all these places are so different from each other, right? But we're all in one country and consider ourselves to be Americans, but we have these different types of Americans within our country. Then I don't think people always take that into consideration. And the same way that you should study the culture of another country when you go there, or before you go there, so that you can, I guess, operate in a respectful manner and know how to interact with people. I feel like you have to do that kind of from state to state too. Especially, I mean, just the etiquette in the South is a lot different than it is out here in the West. And anybody that's been to both places knows that. It's not very hard to pick up on. But the politeness, the sense of community, and the atmosphere is just more inviting in the South, I would say. I love living in the West for many, many reasons, but something about being in Mississippi felt like home to me, and not only just the the scenery, but interacting with strangers there, it just felt right.
Yeah, the West has always been the new frontier in American history, and people went west kind of to grind, so to say, and you could feel that way. Do you feel like in your family and your household, you're kind of trying to create a balance between West and that's still Southern etiquette?
Yeah, that's a good way to put that. I never really thought of it that way, but yeah, all my family still lives in Arkansas, Mississippi, Illinois, for the most part, Midwest and the South. So I'm the only Jones out here other than my wife and my daughter now, right? So I do feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Sometimes it feels like I wish I was closer to my family. That would be nice. It would be nice if I could bring everybody out here. But a lot of my family members, I feel like they're where they're supposed to be too. But the path that I'm walking out here on the West Coast is just a little bit different. And being able to be a leader from afar, I think, is valuable too, because it does also let my family members know that there are other options if they aren't satisfied with where they are.
I feel that.
You know, if none of us are out somewhere else, then it doesn't really feel as attainable, right? And it can be scary to move somewhere where you don't know people. And I know some of my wife's family have moved out here since we've moved out here, and it just gets easier and easier to take that step and look for other opportunities if it's necessary. But at the same time, I have people in my family starting businesses that are very successful in the Chicago area and even down into Mississippi. And some of Maddie's family that I connected with over the past week do the same. And there's opportunity wherever you are, right? The opportunities just present themselves differently, and the potential growth may be different depending on the context that it's in.
For sure. And we live in the age of the internet and internet marketing. So, build something and tap in. Today, we're talking about growth mindset. To you, Blake, what is your definition of growth mindset?
Having an open mind that is prepared to change. Because we were talking about earlier, God made the garden and then he made man and told them to be fruitful and multiply. And we're saying you have to plant the seed first, and then you have a chance to grow, which it requires you to change from that seed into a sprout and then into a tree. And then the idea is that that tree is going to grow up and be strong. But I heard someone mention this past week, which I thought was pretty interesting. When a tree grows, it grows up, but it also grows down, right? The roots are growing into the ground and they get deeper and deeper and stronger. And that's why it's so important for us to remember where we came from and develop those strong roots and those connections with our families, and not forget about our origin, because I think if you lose sight of those things, then your structure isn't as strong up top. And then so you're reaching towards the sky, as you should, with all of your goals and aspirations, but everything that's behind you was so significant in getting you to where you were. I don't believe in living in the past, but the building blocks, they fall in order.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. A tree has no choice, right? It's almost like be fruitful and multiply
or
to
die.
A tree. Exactly. And that's going to be its genetic code. That's what it's going to do if the environment supports it. For a human being, do you feel like it's a command, be fruitful and multiply, or do you feel like it's an option, be fruitful and multiply?
I mean, it's still a command, because the same thing. You either grow or you die. So the people that aren't looking to make change and be better, when you're stagnant, I feel like you start to decay.
Right.
Whether you know it or not, you might be content with what's going on and what you're doing. I don't mean like you can't have the same job for 50 years and not live in the same town and things like that, but there has to be some level of development as you as a human being.
Yeah, you could decay with your energy. You could decay with your spirit, kind of.
Right, because I know that I'm much more thoughtful and, I guess, introspective and even interactive than I was a few years ago. And there was a time in my life where I was more, I guess, outspoken and more of an extrovert. but the quality of my interactions with people were not where they are now.
Yeah.
And that has taken conscious effort for me, and it's been so beneficial, not only in my personal life, but, in my business endeavors and my interactions in the hospital and everything in between.
Yeah. It's just interesting you brought up that imagery of a tree because, like you were saying, the tree is either going to grow or die, but it's going to die because of the conditions around it, possibly. It's from our perspective, it's not from any choices. But the human being is equipped with that mindset that we're talking about today. And that's what's going to choose, along with what could possibly happen in the environment. But then you also could choose to go down rather than be fruitful and multiply just from your own facilities. Obviously, that's what makes us human. It makes us beautiful. But to you, when you have clients or people that look to you where, you know what, I don't even want to ask you that. Let me ask you this. What's the opposite of growth mindset?
The opposite of a growth mindset, complacency.
Complacency? Yeah, a fixed mindset.
Yeah, just being okay with everything. I think that, well, I hesitate to say that because I think you should be okay with everything, but I think we should strive for more than okay.
Yeah.
I think it's okay for us to be where we are right now and at this place, but I want to be great personally.
Yeah.
And even if you don't necessarily think your aspirations are up to whatever the label great is, labels are just labels. I think we do a lot of labeling, and sometimes that restricts growth. I sent you a video kind of about how we can help kids to be more driven and have a more consistent effort, and that comes from focusing on verbs rather than descriptions and adjectives, right?
Okay.
So instead of telling kids that they did well in this test because they're smart, good job, you're so smart. They did well in this test because you prepared and you put a lot of effort forth, and then letting them know, if you keep trying hard like this, you can do whatever you want. You'll be so successful because you try hard and you prepare and you care.
Verbs,
verbs, things that you can do, actionable things, because sometimes we put labels on things and we have that definition in our head and what that looks like. Oh, you're smart. And then it's like, okay, I have a different idea of what smart is. So if I'm smart, maybe I don't have to read as much. I don't have to prepare as much because they told me I'm smart. So I'm going to do well anyway, right? So that complacency and I guess that overconfidence is going to creep in to be a detriment at some point.
I understand that for sure. Those labels can stifle you and oftentimes do.
Yeah, I mean, we label everything, right? So I always say that I take pride in being Black. I take pride in being a father. I take pride in being a man. I take pride in being a husband, take pride in these labels. But I invite people to think about who they are without all of the labels. If you strip it all away, who are you as a human being, right? Without race attached, without gender attached, without whatever it is that you actually perform as in your life. If you're just out in the open, like, what does that look like to you?
Even without the emotions you're feeling right now attached, whatever you've described, like your current state of emotions are. And that's what I always find interesting when I talk about the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset is growth mindset feels stressful emotions when it tries to challenge itself, and then the fixed mindset feels stressful emotions from running into their problems when they're trying to guard themselves from the growth that's trying to happen around them. Could you imagine how difficult it would be for a tree that's supposed to flourish and thrive to try to fight against the dirt and the roots? It would take a lot of energy, and that's happens to people, and that's just one thing I always think is interesting. It's like, choose your stress. The stress of getting better. It's cliche.
Like to say, pick your poison.
Yeah, pick your poison, exactly. And that's a beautiful way to look at that. Who in your childhood was the first person that you saw that was exhibiting a supreme growth mindset that you were just like, oh my gosh, like this person is an icon?
Oh, that's a great question. That was like actually in my personal life.
or anyone that you saw that you could just tell us like their whole approach is
Because I hate,
grow on any.
I mean, automatically I think of like athletes, and I don't
Yeah.
want to say athlete, but
Sure.
you know, I take a lot of pride in the introspection that I've had and the reflection that I've had, and not trying to really emulate anyone else's life.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really have many role models when I was growing up. I
Mm.
would say my grandpas and, you know, my parents in a different way than my grandpas. I think most concrete role model would be my grandpas, just because of what they had accomplished and how they were after the fact. And they were content and they seemed confident, and I could tell that they had always carried this confidence and to get through what they had been through, you know. But I guess as far as like a celebrity,
Nah, dude, I think that was tight.
Well, I just want to say, as far as a celebrity, I always respected Morgan Freeman for some reason, just because of how he maintains this certain image in the public. Everybody has this idea of who Morgan Freeman is when
Right.
it comes to mind, right?
Yeah.
And there aren't many things that have tarnished that image over such a long period of time.
Man.
And that was something that I respected. And I also keep in mind, though, that most people are not the same behind closed doors, in my belief.
Yeah.
So me personally, I like to put myself in a situation where my character behind closed doors also reflects how I am in the public eye. And that was something that was almost to my detriment at some point, because my dad would tell me in the hospital, I can't give all of Blake to my patients. And I was doing that for a while, and it was tearing me up, because you make these strong connections and people die or whatever, not a very good situation, and it tears you up because you care so much. But I knew that I have to care about these people. If I'm going to care for these people, I have to care about them, or else I'm not going to give them the service that they deserve and the best that I'm capable of, right? I can't have this guard up in between. So it was hard for me, but also an understanding that, yes, there can be a work mode of me, but I can find a way to integrate the real me into that too. You know,
Blessing.
We've talked about professionalism and stuff. I think that when I talk in front of the camera, I sound a bit more proper than I do in just a normal conversation, and I'm completely fine with that, because the message that I portray is still the same, and the energy that I give off is still the same. I just want to make sure that everyone's going to hear me in a way that they can understand and relate to.
100%.
And you know, some people might not be able to relate to me in this way when I talk like this, more proper. And then in certain environments, I use slang or whatever, and I'm able to connect with people in that way. And it's not me being fake or putting on different masks, right? It's just me being comfortable with myself and knowing the different facets of life and being able to integrate into these different environments.
And that's beautiful, because that's how you can take a message of growth mindset and talk to different communities about it, and talk to different age groups and people about it, because you're able to speak in those different ways. And to me, that's just always the biggest blessing, is to be able to talk with, and as I'm saying this, my mind's just racing with different moments that I was able to use this, but to be able to just come off in a different light depending on who you're talking to, but send the same message.
Yeah.
Very hard to do that.
To make sure you're going to obtain the respect that you want, you know?
Yeah.
And if you're asking someone for their attention and you want to maintain that, you got to make sure that they're listening in a way that is going to be relatable.
To me, all great art reflects that idea of go with confidence into the unknown. Go with confidence into the places you haven't been and the ideas that you haven't thought of yet.
Yeah. Art's so subjective that it is cool. You have to be confident in what you're producing. Right? You don't know if somebody's going to like your song or like your painting or your sculpture, and it's not really about that. It's about you creating.
Yeah, and anxiety usually rises once you're done and you have to present it. It's not as you're creating it that you feel the stress of being judged. It's once you put it out, it's like, oh man,
right.
What are they going to think?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people have growth mindsets and haven't necessarily labeled it as that, or haven't acknowledged what that is, and I guess understood how to take advantage of it, right?
They're inspired.
Yeah.
Like, they feel inspired, and
they want to do more. A lot of people say, oh, I know I can do so much. Like, I have this potential, and they don't know quite what it is or what the direction is, but they're not content with their current state of being, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think people should go about exploring to have some direction and be able to actually harness that growth mindset?
Yeah. I think that you got to sit with yourself and ask yourself, wow.
Ask yourself, why did my phone fall out of my pocket?
Phone fell out of my pocket. So your question is, how can people kind of get out of what they could feel like a rut and feel some direction?
Well, yeah, because like I said, I think people have growth mindsets and aren't really aware of it, or don't know where to start to actually promote that growth.
For sure. And so that's what I was going to say, is like sitting with yourself, the easiest thing that you can do. You don't need any resources. You sit with yourself, and you can ask yourself these questions and write it down, or just sit in silence. And I believe that things that you care about, things that you feel like you could create to add, that you would actually have energy behind, will start to pop into your head. And then it's just a game from there of, how do I go out here and follow the route that's going to bring me to that idea that I came up with that was actually inspiring me.
Yeah.
But I feel also, once you are inspired to go, how do you stay inspired is a whole other question. You know what I mean? Like,
we talked about that last week.
Right, and we talked about that. But for the beginning, I feel like asking yourself that question, removing distractions, like maybe putting your phone off to the side for a little bit of time and sitting there, thinking about yourself and asking yourself those questions, will produce some very inspirational ideas of what you might picture as your highest self, or
thinking about yourself. Yeah, thinking about yourself is a big point, I think.
And people always say the cliche of the highest self. I'm trying to manifest my highest self.
Right.
But ask yourself, what does the image of my highest self look like? Sit, conjure up that image, and go chase it, right? Or go figure out what the route is to get to it.
And I think that we have to be comfortable and be familiar with our lowest self.
The shadow. The shadow in psychological terms.
Yeah, those dark places that you've been to, the ones that people don't like to relive or really think about and process, and they don't want to talk about it because it's vulnerable, or they might even feel embarrassed that they had been to that point, right? You have to own that, and you can't act like it didn't happen, or else it's going to linger and keep pulling you back, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to stunt your growth.
And a lot of times, hanging out with your shadow or lowest self often and habitually can make a very distorted image of what your highest self is. Right?
I think that some people have to go out and apologize for the bad stuff that they've done.
That's real.
Yeah.
That's real.
Yeah. Because a lot of people want to apologize and they are sorry, but they feel, again, embarrassed, or it feels uncomfortable to approach the person that they've wronged, or admit out loud that they did wrong, even though it's kind of haunting them. And that's something else that's just going to prevent you from moving forward.
Yeah.
And I just invite whoever is sitting out there and relating to that, take that leap of faith, because it feels scary, but it's not going to be the scariest thing you've ever done.
Yeah.
And you're going to feel so much better afterwards. And even if they don't receive it properly, it's going to be beneficial for you, because that'll be the first step towards you doing the right thing and doing good things without worrying about what the outcome is going to be. Because sometimes we make decisions that are kind of reckless, and in those times we don't worry about the outcome or the consequences. And then other times we hold ourselves back from doing what we know is right and things that we know are good, because we think people are going to judge us for that.
For sure.
So if somebody's going to judge you for being good and being kind and doing the right thing, go ahead and let them. But don't let that fear of the potential of not being accepted keep you from being great.
Yeah, we all know that energy that comes with having to do the right thing in a wrong moment. Dude, so many different examples in my life come up. I'm thinking about sometimes when you're officiating a basketball game, the whole crowd can believe that one thing occurred, and you're the only one with the information. They're like, nah, that's not what happened. Like, and I have to come out against all these people's perspective and be like, actually, this. And then you hear everyone collectively disagree, but you have to face the fear. And sometimes it also could be something that your own partners didn't see. You might literally be the only soul in that court and space that saw that angle, and you have to come out with confidence and blow it, because that's why you get paid, and that's why they want you to develop into a strong decision maker.
Yeah.
It's funny when you talked about apologizing, it also made me think about the work I do with students. I've had multiple times where a student will like vandalize the bathroom. They'll go in there and draw stuff or write something on the wall with like a Sharpie, and I hear about it way later on. And I go in there with them, and we already know it's them type thing. And what I'll say to them, they don't really care. Whatever consequences they get with their class and all these things, they don't really care. But it's when I'm like, all right, cool. The janitor gets here at 1, so when he gets here, I'm going to pull you out of class, and I'll let you tell him that you did that because he has to clean it up. And they're like, no, we don't do that. Like, I'm not trying to talk to him. And I'm like, why not? You in there vandalizing it? Like, go tell him that that's what you wanted to do. And look that man in the face that has to go scrub that off for his job, you know? And it brings a whole nother element. And kids never want to actually do that. They never want to go tell him, but they wanted to be super cool drawing their stuff in there, you know?
Yeah, I think that's powerful because we don't always see how our actions affect people, you know, especially when you do things that are selfish like that, that, you know, really don't seem like a big deal to a lot of people.
For sure. But the supreme expression of taking responsibility in that moment would be, all right, I'll go see him, be like, my bad. I wasn't really equating this with another human being and being showing any level of empathy. Now I see that. My bad about that, and then move on and don't vandalize stuff.
Those are strong seeds to plant. Because without that, they'll continue to have that behavior, and then it escalates into them spraying the side of a public building or something, right? Out in the middle of the open. So, you know, again, I got to say, these kids are blessed to have you in this role because you could be doing a lot of other things. You could just be reffing. You could be, you know, starting all these businesses that you've thought of solely. And you know that this is allowing you to grow in a different way that you wouldn't be able to without it, right?
For sure.
Same way for me working in the hospital. You know, I'm working PRN right now, so it's not a full-time schedule, but I feel like I need to still have that exposure to that environment, even though it's not my favorite place to be by any shot. But every time I go and work in the hospital, I feel like it helps me grow a little bit, and I have a meaningful interaction with at least one person, but more often than not, several people. And not only developing communication skills, but my confidence and my ability to explain things to people and, you know, have that level-headedness and be able to react to certain things that happen and be that person, I guess, that's has the opportunity to lead and make meaningful decisions, you know, because I could make decisions just for myself so that I could benefit me and my family, which is what I do. But my role and your role is much bigger than us. And we do have a place in this community that we have to attend to also.
For sure. And that brings us back to growth mindset, because sometimes growth mindset is putting yourself just where you're going to have the most growth rather than thinking about just the financial of the situation. You know what I'm saying? If you see a fruitful area and you're just like, wow, I put myself there and grow all types of different perspectives and virtues that I might not have known were so important just in this environment, put yourself there. You know, that's what I love talking with some of the people that I get to train and younger people that are trying to figure out what they're doing with school or getting done with school right now. And to them, they're kind of the same way. They're just, I just want more experience. I just want experience. I want to go through these days and see what happens and see how we handle it. I'm like, that's awesome. You know, I love working with people like that who never mention to me about what they're going to get paid for it and only talk about what the experience from it is going to do for them, you know?
Yeah, and it's hard to do because money is important, right? Super. Especially right now. Like, we have to make sure that we can eat and have the resources to be fruitful and multiply, right?
Sure.
But lost my train of thought. That
and it's
very often.
Man, but you're right, and that's the balance that we look for in America is sometimes if you have to go super hard and do something where maybe the experiences aren't adding to your overall image of your highest self, because you just need to get money and resources at that time.
Right. And I remember what I was going to say, because you're talking about the environment that you grow in and where you plant that seed. And that's so crucial, because if you think about planting a seed in a small pot, that plant can only grow so big. But if you plant that seed out in the open and it has the opportunity to engage with these other plants and these other seeds and share that same soil, right? I feel like that's what we do when we go interact with the community and worry about more than just our own journey and that of our family.
Man,
you know,
yeah, that's real.
You got to go be part of the forest or the jungle if you really want to grow and see your true potential.
Man, that's such a great way to put it. And I start to think of bees. Local bees are pollinating the same flowers and moving from those same plants to plants. So even if you're in proximity, it's almost like those similar touches of your growth are gonna, hit all of y'all.
You only focus on one flower, then you're not gonna continue to multiply. Right? Yeah. Man. So
that's why it's the garden, man. Like you brought the biblical reference in with the be fruitful and multiply, and that's why it's just so interesting. It's a garden of Eden. Like, it's a whole garden. And that's kind of how this is, and why it's so easy for us to keep going back to the imagery of these plants, because that garden is almost like the fabric of reality that we're in.
Oh, yeah, it is. I mean, we are beings that have constructed all these things in the middle of nature, and sometimes we ignore nature. And nature's so beautiful and it's powerful. And sometimes we learn that through natural disasters, right? One of my biggest fears, I was talking about this past week, because that's one reason I don't really like going to the South and the Midwest, especially this time of year. Tornadoes terrify me. I grew up in Kansas City, where you have tornado warnings, and in school you have to go down in the basement. During a real tornado drill we had multiple times, and the way that those things just destroy towns and cities, it's like amazing, right? But those are the kind of darker sides of nature that don't happen nearly as frequently as all of the bright sides and beautiful things in nature that we often take for granted and don't pay attention to.
Right.
Yeah. So sometimes I feel like those natural disasters are the wake-up calls for us to take care of this world that we live in.
Man, and they usually were in the stories in the Bible. The cataclysmic events, the natural disasters were usually wake-up calls or just the final say of, all right, you guys are going the wrong way. Let me just restart.
Exactly.
And there's all types of present day implications to those biblical stories. There's all types of great resources to learn about those things. But as I get older, that's what has been sparking my interest more. Is like, I'm see this story in the news in Kansas City. And I'm not going to say it mimics a story I just read in the Bible, but it's like these things also happen now and then, but they're not always to teach the same lesson. I'm not trying to make it seem like I see a natural disaster and these people need to learn, but you get what I'm saying. There's times where you're like, holy, like that makes sense. That was a flood, and the flood brought new. It was terrible and it brought new.
And I mean, it's just part of this constant chaos we live in too, right? Sometimes I tell Maddie, I'm like, ooh, life's been a little too sweet for a little too long. I feel like something's going to happen. And
what do you think?
It's just realistic.
Do you think that idea is like a kind of traumatic idea or a realistic idea? I heard you say realistic. Yeah.
I mean, we're bound to lose loved ones. We're bound to have injuries. We're bound to break items that we care about, stuff like that, right? So it may not be as dramatic as the thought, but something will happen that's not favorable at some point in my life.
I think the difference is when people are like, something soon is going to happen bad. We're like, life's been too good. I know something bad's about to happen. I think that's where it's like, why do we feel that way sometimes? And is that kind of like a lower energy, like poor idea?
I mean, it could be, but I mean, for me personally, I don't think that way regularly.
I find myself thinking that way sometimes.
Well, yeah.
I find myself being like, bro.
Well, yeah, because sometimes it's like, I mean, I love the life I live, right? And sometimes I'm really like, man, is it really like this? Like, it can't be this good, right? When is it gonna happen? Right. And I think it's more preparation, though, because I know something's going to happen that I don't like. I can't like everything, whether it's on the other side of the world, down the street, or in my home. You just have to be prepared and know that when those bad things happen, it's not the end of the world, God willing. but it's something that you have to face, and it will be an opportunity to grow. You know, when life is too cushy for too long, I feel like that's not a growth environment because
Yeah.
you need that stress to grow.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you just said that. It's not the end of the world, God willing. That helps me finalize why I thought it was so great you brought the biblical thing, because now there's the covenant that as these natural disasters occur, it won't be the final one because
Right.
there's the covenant now.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's why that always makes me think about it. It's not necessarily that there's some divine moment there, but we know that it's not the end of the world, God willing.
Well, I mean, it's all about perspective too, you know, because I'm sure there's people up in Washington that don't think twice about tornadoes that happen in Mississippi, and there's probably people in North Dakota that don't think twice about the hurricanes that happen in Florida, stuff like that. So, but the people that are in it, it does seem like the end of the world, and it's awful, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it just depends on how you look at those things because, I mean, take Hurricane Katrina, for example. That was terrible. A lot of people died and it displaced so many people from their homes. But we live in a world of 8 billion people, right? So there are people that weren't directly affected by that. There are people in this world who don't know it ever happened, right?
Right, yeah.
But it is a significant event nonetheless. So you can bring that down to scale to the things that take place in your life. You know, sometimes things happen in our life and it feels like the end of the world. Oh, this is so terrible. But you have to understand that so many other people are going through the same exact thing.
Yeah.
And this moment being terrible is not mean that the rest of your life is going to be terrible.
Let me ask you, when you talk to, bringing it back to the beginning of the pod, when you talk to the man who was at the Jackson, Mississippi Civil Rights Museum,
Yeah, Hezekiah Watkins.
did he ever say that there was a time where he felt like it was the end, super pessimistic, like, oh man, we're not going to get done what we want to get done? Or he just always was like, back to the fighting spirit?
No, that was one of the bravest dudes I ever met in my life.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Because I've said so many times, I don't want to ever have to go to court, let alone ever go to jail or prison, you know? And for him to make that sacrifice where he could have been killed for a lot of the stuff that he did, right? Just for drinking at the wrong water fountain or going into the wrong bus station or standing on the wrong sidewalk or talking to the wrong person or going to the wrong store, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the things that he got arrested for were ridiculous. But he knew that it was wrong. So he continued to protest against it because he knew that if he didn't do it, then it was never going to change.
That's real.
And he started these acts when he was 13 years old, you know, and people might have seen it as recklessness. And he talked about the conversation that he had with his mother. His mom didn't even want to tell him what freedom riders were. His teacher, his favorite teacher, didn't even want to tell him what freedom riders were because everyone knew that those were the people that were at most risk of being killed, you know. But he recognized that that was his opportunity to do something great, and he didn't let fear stop him from doing that, and he fought for what he thought was right, not only in his community but also in his home. He had to convince his mom that what he was doing was worthwhile, and eventually she had to accept that too.
Yeah, and for our audience, like, what were the Freedom Riders doing?
So they were basically protesting against the Jim Crow laws and all of the segregation that was taking place in the South. So, I guess a lot of people might not be aware that, you know, there were whites only and blacks only water fountains, 60 years ago, in the 60s, not that long ago. There were certain bus stations that only white people could go to. There were certain entrances and seats at the movie theaters that were for black people, and that was through the back where nobody could see them. And everybody knows about Rosa Parks, you know, sitting in the area of the bus she wasn't supposed to be on. But I think sometimes we think it was only the bus. Like, that was everything was separate and everything was unequal. And it took people like Hezekiah Watkins who were fed up with how that was, even in his young age, and being motivated to make it better for people like us and later on in life, or I guess generations down the road, you know, because he was alive through the integration phase, the desegregation, but even a lot of those things that he did, he wasn't able to reap the benefits until later in life, especially because he spent so much time in and out of jail and prison,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
But that was a sacrifice that I'm super grateful that he made. And again, it's like me personally, I know my purpose in this world, and I don't think mine is to be in and out of jail for any reason, even if it is like protesting. I respect and appreciate the people that are down to protest, but having those confrontations with police officers is not something that is on my list of to do.
Yeah, and that's why it's so much respect to that man, because your temperament, your countenance, and the way you approach life in his time, you would have been in and out of jail. They wouldn't have.
Exactly.
They wouldn't have liked your confidence and the way you're out here trying to live. So you know, it's so beautiful that we're able to still even hear messages from some of these people that face so much fear on our behalf and for our benefit.
Yeah, it's just such a blessing that he survived through all of that, right? Because a lot of people didn't. You know, Emmett Till, for example, his name was up on the wall in that museum that we went to, and shame on me, I still haven't watched that movie because I just know it's going to be like so emotional. But I certainly know about the story. So you just have to salute to everyone who did something for us here today. Yeah. And I know that I'm going to continue to try to do things that I feel will affect the generations to come, because I always talk about how amazing I believe my daughter is, and I think a lot of people say that about their kids, but I'm going to at least make sure that my daughter has fair opportunity to show the world how amazing she is.
Yeah, and we never want to see a generation where they think that the fear that they have of growing and doing better is too much. You know, I never want to see a group of kids that's like, oh man, I'm afraid of doing that, so all of us choose not to try to be better, right? Because we're always going to go back to those examples of those people that did nothing but face fear.
And it's cool you say that, because at the beginning of the year, I'm not a big New Year's resolution guy at all, but I like a theme for my year. And I said that this would be a year of no fear for me, you know? And I feel like this is a perfect conversation to display that. And a lot of that was inspired by me having a daughter. She's going to be turning 1 in September. And next week I'll be 27. This will be my first birthday as a father, right? Yeah. And you know, some of the things that I've feared in the past and some of the things that I've shied away from, now I don't feel like I can afford to do that, because I have so much more responsibility and I have to be a leader for my family, right? And I'm also confident in my abilities to continue to be resourceful for them and provide them with the things that they want and they need. And I know that I have the support of my family and my parents and you and your family and all of our friends. And there's just so many people behind me that I have to be grateful for that and take advantage of it and make sure that it's not in vain, right? So, you know, all the people that are listening to this right now supporting us, just know that even you listening to this conversation, that means a lot to me. Yeah. I don't care if it's 3, 4, or 1 person. Even one person to listen to this and just feel that energy from me, knowing that I'm going to make sure I maintain this growth mindset and try to sprinkle that same mindset across as many people as I can, because I don't believe in competition. I think that the only person I'm competing with is myself, and I want to be better than the guy that I was a moment ago. So each moment I'm trying to grow, right? Yep. Each moment's an opportunity for growth, each day, each week, each year. So however you want to look at it, perspective of time, just know that moving forward, you can change however you want to. You just have to take the necessary steps.
That's real.
I think a lot of people get afraid of taking that first step, and I get that, because it's mostly a fear of failure, right? But we have to realize that we are going to fail, especially if you're going to do something great. If you don't allow yourself to fail, then you can't expect to succeed. That doesn't work that way. So, you know, if you've ever had an opportunity to sit and talk with someone that you respect, just think about what you respect them for and really listen to what they're saying about their journey. And don't really focus on all of the light and glory, but try to dig into the struggle, because the struggle is necessary.
Yeah. Over and over again, the struggle will be necessary. And that's why it's interesting, as we talked about the highest self and the shadow and the psychology of those images. It's necessary in your personal story, your personal feelings, and then the collective. to know about the struggle. We started off this episode talking about how it's beautiful when maybe our past traumas or things that we don't like that happen become so distant from us that we reminisce with fondness, almost like they are a museum, our own museum. And when our negative experiences become that distant from us, it's a beautiful thing because it's almost like a collectible and a representation of how strong you were able to be and probably still continue to be.
Yeah, definitely. And again, just be proud of you. Proud that you're here today, that you woke up and made it through another one, right? Proud that you did all the things that you did, even if they weren't great, you know. It's in the past. You either get to reflect and see it as a learning opportunity or reflect and be proud of yourself. Those are your two options, right?
Yeah. Honestly, the idea of Mila in the Jackson, Mississippi in the South is just such a great, image. I can only imagine. It's just new baby, just not Phoenix knowing girl. Anything. Yeah, little Phoenix girl. She gets there and just so much history around her, but she's so innocent and able to be protected in this moment. There's no sense of fear, whereas, 200 years in that same place, like she'd be in such a vulnerable situation.
Right.
And it's just beautiful, like the strength that there is able to come from this story of American history. And this is why I say that a lot of times I think some of the people who are descendants from the brutalities of these places are very American. I think a lot of people think when people start to get into Black history, it makes them anti-American. Very patriotic to look back on that history and still be proud of the land and what it is and what you can accomplish in it now.
Yeah, more so just proud of the people and proud of them for making it out of those situations and enduring with what they dealt with. And it's just a good reminder for me, like when times are tough, they're really not.
Yeah.
They're really not. I've had an easy life compared to millions, billions of others, you know? So that's something I try to remind myself. And it's tough when you recognize those things and some of the people that you're around might not recognize those things because you still have to have like this reality, you know? You have to be in touch with reality and the things around you. And sometimes having that happy-go-lucky, like, oh, my life is amazing because, etc., it doesn't really fit into your interactions with people, you know? So that's something that I'm learning to juggle because I've just had so many revelations and epiphanies in this past year since becoming a father. And I feel like I can connect with other dads now because I think a lot of people see dads and think they're confident and, have this certain persona that you don't have unless you're a dad. And, being in that situation myself, you just have this different perspective on life. You see your little girl being so curious and paying attention to things that you ignore normally, from the little piece of lint in the corner. Like, why do you pick that up? Why are you trying to put that in your mouth? Like, how do you even notice that, Just paying attention to detail and being appreciative for new things and also realizing that there are new things that you haven't noticed sitting right in front of you just because we are so distracted all the time, whether it's from technology or our responsibilities, the things that we have in our head that we know we have to get to. And just so many things throughout the day kind of take us away from the moment and away from the present. And when you're able to focus on the present and be present and just be, it's very powerful.
Man, that's beautiful that you put it that way. And you mentioned in this podcast, be fruitful and multiply. That first word is powerful in that command, be. That's the first thing that said is be.
Verb. Yep.
That's real.
Yeah, because fruitful is a description, right?
Right.
And multiply is a verb.
Yeah,
but the first verb in that phrase is be.
Be.
So I invite everyone to be whatever you want to be.
And just be.
And just be. And thank you for listening to R and B. I think this has been a good one, man. This has been good.
Yeah, thanks.
Wow. Can't wait to listen to it myself. And if you listen this far, I know you liked it. So please hit the like button. Share with someone you care about a whole lot. Maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people you care about. But I asked just for one. And realize whether you're listening to this on Apple, Google, Spotify, Anchor, or watching us on YouTube. Hey, Mom. We appreciate you so much, and the growth has only just begun, It's episode 27.
Yep.
Man, thank God for this opportunity. I don't think I said that at the beginning. Thank God for a 27th episode. And yeah, I'm going to be 27 next time I talk to y'all. So expect to see some growth.
Thank God for this episode. And shout out DMX, because you did a DMX cover for the intro song, and you know DMX spits his gospel. So R.I.P. DMX, and shout out where the pod at.
Love it. All right, y'all. It's time to get out of here. And like last week, we'll see you next week.
Peace.
Peace.